Graniola. This is the Graniola channel, and I'd like to tell you a folk tale. The story of Fatal Bet is told as a reminder that calm usually follows conflict. There was once a girl that was named Fatal Bet. That probably seems like an odd name to you, but once you know the circumstances of her birth, the name will seem apt. Two bandits were in the forest fighting to resolve a disagreement they were having. One of the men wanted to sneak into the village from the left, and the other was convinced that a better plan was to move quietly in from the right. Neither one had any interest in listening to the other, and they were both screaming at the top of their lungs when they were simultaneously both struck dumb by seeing a very pretty and quite obviously pregnant young woman step into the clearing just in front of them. They both calmed down for a moment, and one of them suggested that the person that was able to guess the sex of the child that the heavily pregnant woman was carrying would be the winner of the argument. If it had been in another place at a different time, they could have just stopped the woman and politely asked her if she were carrying a girl or a boy. But in this story, instead, they murdered her and then cut her stomach open. And in that way, they discovered that her issue was a little girl. Congratulating themselves on having resolved their argument, the two malcreants departed swiftly toward the left, and having no more use for the little baby, left her on the forest floor. The murdered woman was the daughter of the lion god, and because there were so many people interested in her welfare, it didn't take them long to find her dead body and that of her newborn child. The baby was robust and beautiful, and she didn't seem to have experienced any adverse effects from her time alone on the forest floor. Despite losing her mother and having had a horribly traumatic birth, the girl was resilient and grew up to be a great beauty and a wonderful person. Her father, the lion god, doted on her, and when it became time for her to marry, he declared that he would find the appropriate husband for her. And by for her, I mean someone whose status he admired and would make him look good. After a great deal of thought, he settled on two prospective bridegrooms, but then couldn't decide which he preferred. One was a mighty serpent and the other was a powerful bird. As there was no way to know which one would make the better husband, he decided to arrange for a race between them, after which the winner would wed his precious daughter. This was going to be an extremely important event, and the townspeople baked and cooked and decorated in anticipation of the day when the race would take place. The girl, naturally, was much more worked up than anyone else was. When the big day arrived, she was thrilled to watch the two important creatures vying for her hand. She was just as enthusiastic as the rest of the townspeople, happily applauding and cheering as the two left the starting gate. The race was too close to immediately call. Half of the villagers believed that the serpent had won, and the remaining 50% were certain that it was the bird who was the victor. Although the girl had been flushed and excited as she watched the two near the finish line, her enthusiasm waned as she saw them both go off together to have something to eat and drink after their arduous race. She felt both humiliated and heartbroken that they were not paying the least bit of attention to her. Before they could acknowledge her, she had run off in tears into the forest. Her best friend, who was meant to be her bridesmaid, made no attempt to comfort her and allowed her to run off alone. The girl was now doubly devastated, ignored by her future husband, and abandoned by her best friend. She ran and ran until, unbeknownst to her, she arrived at the clearing where her mother had been killed. Exhausted and without hope, she fell there, and that is where, like her mother, she breathed her last breath. The girl dies alone in the forest, but her spirit returns, and she visits both her father, the lion, and her best friend to comfort them with love and compassion and forgiveness. This is a tale that is told in the Ivory Coast in West Africa. The story is celebrated by a dance which is performed several times during a year, always by a man wearing a mask to cover his face, checkered clothing to distort his body, and layers of seed pods tied around his ankles and wrists to keep time with the music.